Hello, and welcome back, friends and enemies. Today, we are back with another Moral Orel video. This time, it's going to be on Season 3, Episode 8, Passing. Now, this is a Clay Puppington-centered episode, so if you weren't ready to explore some dark territories, this is your warning. Now, this episode begins with Clay talking to Orel about Old Gunny and how it has been a tradition for the head of the household to pass off the gun to their firstborn son. Then we flash back to Clay's childhood when his father is attempting to pass the gun on to him. But Clay was clearly not comfortable with the situation and wouldn't even hold the non-loaded gun properly, claiming it went against the commandments of thou shalt not kill, but his father even says that the gun is not loaded. So then Clay brings up the lost commandments, which seem to be either some commandments that Clay started making up when he was a child, or that were told to him by his mother. But when his father said that it was cute when you were a kid, it makes it seem like Clay used the idea of lost commandments to get out of doing things that he was uncomfortable with, or even just didn't want to do. Now, I also would like to let you know that at this point, Clay's father name is Arthur Puppington, and his wife, Clay's mother, is Angela Puppington. Now let's begin. Interestingly enough, once Arthur leaves the room, Clay does end up picking up the gun again and holds it properly, even saying, "I am a real man," while pointing it around. He also happens to look at the bullets for a second, but he actually doesn't load it as far as we know. We then transition into Arthur going into the kitchen, being happy to see that the meal is ready, and attempts to kiss his wife, Angela, but she doesn't let him and tells him to sit down. The young Clay walks in as it becomes clear at this point that he's very close to his mother, which would explain his compulsion to follow the commandments, even the made up ones, because his mother seems to be a very religious person as well. It also seems that she coddles him due to how the two act after only being apart for a few minutes. This is possibly due to the fact that Clay is an only child and was her miracle baby. Clay then tells his mother about his father having him hold the gun, to which his mother quickly lets out a shriek. It is at this point where Arthur reminds Angela about her heart condition. I'd also like to mention that Clay only tells his mother this when his father makes a sarcastic remark about the validity of the lost commandments. Angela goes on to berate Arthur, but he makes sure to tell her that it wasn't even loaded. It is at this point where she says, "Don't use that word." This is in reference to dead. When he said dead, apparently she's not okay with you even using a word that has dead in it. This shows us that dead is a very sensitive topic for Angela. Moving on now, Arthur goes on to remind Angela that Clay is 12 years old. And she tells him how she counts and savors every second of it. Another thing that I'd like to point out here is how when Clay is finished eating his meal, that Angela automatically pushes the plate towards his father. And that is what he gets to eat, the leftovers of his son. Now, on one hand, it's good not to waste food, but on the other hand, she didn't even bother setting a plate for her husband at the table. Going back to that scene where he enters the kitchen and attempts to kiss her, the initial seat that he was going to sit in is the one with the plate and the food already set up in it. But apparently it was the one that she was reserving for the son, not him. It seems that in this family, the father gets the literal and metaphorical leftovers, whether it be the leftover food or the leftover attention/affection of his wife. After this, Arthur announces that he is going to eat in the den and takes the ketchup with them. This is very similar to how Clay, in his adult life, living in a marriage where his wife seems not to care about him, so he spends a lot more time alone in his study. While Arthur is in the den, we see him reminisce while looking at old photos of him and Angela when they were younger, when they were happy to spend time together, and then he toasts his sad meal to the old them. We then cut back to Clay and Angela sitting down looking at pictures of Clay once again, making it seem like this is a regular pastime for the two. This could be one of the reasons that Clay, in his glimpse of his younger years, seems to have some level of narcissistic tendencies. He is constantly being reminded by his mother that he is his precious only ever, and is held on a pedestal by her, being given 100% of the attention at all times. It also seems that he enjoys partaking in this, as when he looks at the picture of himself from 3 weeks ago, he says how he was so cute. But anyways, after Clay is looking at one of his more recent pictures, he asks his mother if they can start from the beginning of the photo album. And while she turns the pages back a bit, he asks her to go all the way back. She seems very nervous and hesitant to do so upon saying there's nothing really that far back, stating how there are pictures from when before Clay was born. Upon clearing that, he proudly says, "Oh, then forget it," but does ask if the pictures are of his mother and father. And to that she says yes, and others. He begins to ask who the others are. Angela states that he never met them. He asks why not, are they dead? And Angela makes a big deal saying that we don't talk like that. She then explains to the young Clay that they call it passing, not death, and that they try to forget that it's there. Her analogy was that the word and everything that it represents just passes out of their memory, which is what I find a bit ironic considering how important religion is in the household, at least to her. This is because for the most part, a big portion of the incentive to follow religious doctrines is to ensure that you have a good afterlife. Even the religion they choose to follow does acknowledge death as being a natural part of life. Given this information, I find it odd that Angela, being someone who follows Christianity, is so fazed by the notion of death. Yes, we find out that she has had many miscarriages, but given her faith, wouldn't she assume that they are guided safely into heaven as soon as they died, since they did no wrong? But those are just my assumptions. As the story goes on, Clay begins to pester his mother to see who passed. She then begins to turn the pages back. We see a picture of her pregnant while smoking a cigarette and drinking, which Clay wrongfully assumes is him. Angela corrects him by saying that is her pregnant with his oldest brother Clark. He tries to correct her by saying, "I don't have any brothers, I'm your precious only ever." She tells him that Clark never made it into their world alive. There's a somber moment where Clay begins to realize what that means. He turns another page and asks if that picture is of her pregnant with him or Clark. The way that he asks, or Clark, we can hear undertones of jealousy in Clay's voice. She says no, that's his oldest sister, Clarissa. He is shocked to hear this and asks how many sisters there were. Angela begins to flip pages saying Clementine, Clara, Clarice, Clea. I'd like to note that in all the pictures she is smoking and drinking while pregnant. Clay is shocked to hear this as well, and he says counting Clark and Clarissa that makes 6. Hinting at him realizing that he wasn't the only ever precious child. Angela also says that there was also Clancy, Clarence, Clinton, and Klondike with a C, his brothers. Another quick side note, I'd just like to say that I like how all the names of her children begin with a C. I'm not sure if there's any significance there, but if you know anything about that or have any ideas, feel free to comment down below. Clay then proclaims, "I had 10 siblings." Angela interjects saying, "had almost." She then confirms to Clay that they all passed while they were still inside her. And then she says an interesting line, that her body was their vessel to heaven. Which, once again, going back to what I said earlier about her stillborn children going to heaven, I don't see why she is so traumatized by that to the point where she doesn't even like to hear the word death, since they would be going to heaven, to a supposed paradise. Now, while I do get that having many miscarriages would traumatize a person, I do think that the amount of time since said miscarriages happened to her, on top of her strong religious beliefs, that she could at least find some happiness in thinking that her children are in a better world now, and would be able to come to terms with that. But then again, I am a bit ignorant on the subject of child loss, as I currently have no children. Anyway, going back to the story, she once again tells Clay that he was her miracle, and that it was because of God and all the praying that she did that caused him to be born alive. She then goes on a small rant about how she was so busy praying all the time that she didn't have time to smoke, and how her stomach was in knots so she could not drink. She didn't horseback ride or go on roller coasters, and how she never used a trampoline. Basically saying that she was so busy praying all the time that she wasn't able to do all the activities that led to all her other children being born dead. All the while, we get this slow zoom of Clay just sitting there processing the information that he had multiple siblings. and then confirms with his mother that he is not her precious only ever. Angela then claims that he is her precious only living ever. This is a huge hit to Clay's ego that he can't handle. His whole life he has been coddled by his mother, as she constantly claims that he is her precious only ever, which made him feel like the center of the universe, and he was treated and praised very often for doing basically nothing. This is most likely what led him to develop his narcissism. This same narcissism that led him not being able to handle the idea that he wasn't the only ever child that Angela attempted to have. Clay then claims that Angela lied to him, and then freaks out and runs out of the room, stating that he is no longer going to be her precious only living ever anymore. She then tries to get him to come back and tells him to wait, but instead of saying Clay, she says Clarence before correcting herself. She sobs, heartbroken on the couch, until the sound of a gun is heard going off. We then cut to the den. Clay laying on the ground with what appears to be blood all over him. His father, Arthur, is the first to enter the room and go over to his son, while his mother just starts screaming at the entrance. She goes over with Arthur to hold their son's corpse. The two begin to argue over how this could happen. Arthur says it was a mistake. Angela screams that there is no mistakes, only evil and miracles, and how this was not a miracle. She then pleads to the Lord to take her, and to let this pass through her instead. She continues to beg to the Lord while Arthur is frantically calling the ambulance and is trying to explain the situation, when he pauses and looks at the mirror, only to see a bottle of ketchup behind the seat. He is trying to tell Angela that her son is not dead. Being visibly upset, he grabs Clay and tells him to open his eyes, and how he wants this prank ended. Angela then exclaims, "Don't use that word." He shouts, "I said it." And then Clay opens his eyes, saying, "What? I didn't do anything wrong." Angela is ecstatic to see her precious only living ever still alive, and says that it is a miracle and how the Lord has answered her prayers. At that same time, Arthur is trying to say that there is no miracles. Angela then quickly stands up and says that the Lord has passed it through her and that she is coming, while Clay hugs her, saying hooray, not understanding the seriousness of what he has done. Clay then lets out a confused "what?" as his mother begins to fall. Arthur yells, "Angela, no!" Arthur catches her on the floor while Clay tries to run over, only for his father to push him away and give him a deathly glare full of hate, while Clay just sits there hyperventilating, looking at the scene. The scene then fades to when the paramedics are taking the body out of the house, saying that it was cardiac arrest and how she was in heaven before they got there. Arthur lets out a defeated, "No, there is no heaven." Clay begins to cry while they take the body out and goes to hug his dad, but Arthur just pushes him off him, saying, "I don't need any more of your leftovers." Going back to what I said earlier and how the dynamic of this family is that the father only seems to get what's left over from the son, metaphorically and literally. This was the one time in this episode that we see Clay give any sort of attention to his father, even try to go to him for comfort. Before, he would always just go to his mother. After Clay is pushed off, he says to Arthur that he will go to hell for saying there is no heaven. In response, Arthur raises a hand in a motion that makes it seem like he is going to slap him, but then just shakes his head at the boy, saying, "You aren't even worth it." This is the second critical blow to Clay's ego in this day. We hear Clay repeat to himself, "Not worth it," as he begins to look down and cry. In the next scene, we see the pair at the dinner table not speaking to each other. Clay then attempts to fling his butter knife at his dad, and it ends up in the corn that Arthur is eating, to which Arthur responds, "Thank you," and uses it to butter the corn. He then asks him to pass the ketchup that he killed his mother with. Clay, being angry about this comment, grabs the ketchup and slams it in the middle of Arthur's plate, breaking it, and saying, "Now am I worth it?" defiantly, only to receive a smack in response. His father stares blankly at the plate, while Clay grows a smile on his face after being hit. We then get a montage with a perfectly fitting song that plays over it. It's called the Love, Love, Love by the Mountain Goats. I can't play it for you here since it's copyrighted, but you should look it up on YouTube after this video is over. In the montage, we have Clay saying snarky, offensive, and insensitive comments directed towards his father, only to be met with a slap, which Clay responds to by smiling lovingly. This just goes to show how Clay, who is used to getting all of his mother's attention all the time, suddenly being put into a household where The only way that he can get any attention or acknowledgement of his existence is by doing something that upsets his father enough for him to slap him. And this is the only way that Clay can receive the attention and feeling of being worth it that he craves. So he does anything to get this out of his father, even insults him during his prayers at the table. While Clay joyously eats after being slapped, his father looks at him with so much contempt. He tells Clay that he wants to see him in his study now, paralleling what Clay says to Orel when he takes a lesson the wrong way. While in the study, which also happens to be the same room he referred to as the den before, Arthur tells Clay once again about the long tradition of the Puppington household to pass the gun onto the firstborn son and to have a coming-of-age hunting trip. He says that he is not passing the gun down to Clay because of tradition. He says he is in fact ending the tradition and that he will not take him on the hunting trip. He does not want the gun anymore since it is now tainted with blood. Clay responds to this by saying, "Are you sure it's not just ketchup?" Arthur then says, "No, take a closer look. You killed your mother with this gun," and then drops it in his hands. Clay happily says, "You know it's a sin to bear false witness," with a smile upon his face, knowing full well what will happen soon. With his hand in the air, Arthur pauses for a second, looking around the room. Clay states the lost 63rd commandment about loading a gun with a child in the house, then recoils back and closes his eyes, expecting a slap, only to open them, looking up to see his father has now left the room. This is most likely due to how Arthur had begun to recognize the pattern in Clay's behavior and just stops caring outright. Clay then looks down at Gunny and says, "Don't worry, Gunny, I'll keep the tradition going." It then fades to the scene of adult Clay looking over Orel, who is now holding Gunny in his hand. Clay then takes the gun away from Orel and hands him another one, saying, "Why don't you try this one instead?" To which Orel only responds with a disappointed "oh." And that is where this episode ends. I mean, as the end credits roll, we see an image of Clay and a glass of liquor and a slow zoom on his face. This probably goes to show us that the events of this episode is one of the main reasons for his drinking habit. We also see how Clay developed his masochistic tendencies from him being hit as a child, by it being the only way that his father would acknowledge his existence. It can also be assumed that the feeling of closeness and being worthy that his mother would give him is why, as he grew older, he continued to follow Christianity, to the great extent that he did before he met Blaberta. I mean, he did continue to pass on the following of the religious doctrine to his family, so it wasn't completely thrown to the side after he met and married Blaberta. But afterwards, from what we see in the series, Clay is far from virtuous and is often shown in a bad, sinful light, especially when compared to the pure Orel. But yeah, that's all for today, guys. There was a lot to break down in this episode. If you had any thoughts or had anything else to add, feel free to comment down below. If you reach this point in the video, I'll ask you to leave a like, it helps a lot. And make sure to subscribe here if you're new to my channel. I'm still growing on YouTube and I have a lot more videos to make. And until next time, I'll see ya.